Divorcing you was the smartest financial move my son ever did, my ex-mother-in-law sneered, bragging about his massive new villa. I just smiled, tightly holding the bank's foreclosure documents. Are you sure about that? Have you ever poured your entire heart into a family that only saw you as a stepping stone? Share your own survival stories in the comments below, and please subscribe to hear how I finally took my power back. But to understand how we reached that unforgettable showdown at the VIP bank lounge, we have to go back to where my healing truly started. It began on a quiet, seemingly ordinary morning. The aroma of dark roast coffee filled my minimalist apartment, a stark contrast to the chaotic mornings I used to endure. I stood by the window, watching the city wake up, adjusting the cuffs of my tailored blazer. It had been exactly 365 days since the divorce papers were finalized. 1 year since I walked out of a marriage that had slowly suffocated my spirit. Today, I was heading to the bank's VIP lounge to finalize the purchase of my first commercial property, a milestone. Yet, as I picked up my briefcase, a shadow of the past brushed against my mind. Mark, and inevitably, his mother, Eleanor. For 5 years, I had poured every ounce of my love, energy, and finances into our marriage. I worked late shifts, managed our budget down to the last penny, and smiled through the constant subtle jabs from Eleanor about my background. Mark deserves a woman who elevates him, she used to say, loud enough for me to hear from the kitchen. I had convinced myself that endurance was a form of love, but endurance without mutual respect is just a prolonged heartbreak. I shook my head, clearing the phantom echoes of Eleanor's condescending voice. I was no longer the exhausted, accommodating daughter-in-law who apologized for simply existing. The woman looking back at me in the hallway mirror had rebuilt her life from scratch. My design agency was thriving, my soul was healing, and my bank account was finally my own. I took a deep breath, letting the quiet peace of my home anchor me. Today was about my future. I had no idea that the past was already waiting for me, ready to ambush my hard-won tranquility in the most unexpected place. The drive to the bank was a quiet one, allowing my mind to wander back to the days I thought I had buried. Mark was a dreamer, a man full of grand visions and hollow follow-throughs. I fell in love with his passion, naive enough to believe that my pragmatism would be the perfect anchor to his soaring ambitions. But in a marriage, an anchor can easily become a dead weight if both people aren't rowing in the same direction. Whenever Mark's business ventures failed, and they failed often, it was somehow my fault for not being supportive enough. But support, in Eleanor's eyes, meant silent servitude. I remembered the endless nights I spent balancing spreadsheets for my own job while simultaneously trying to untangle Mark's financial messes. I never complained, I just worked harder. I took on freelance projects, missing weekends and holidays, just to keep our heads above water. And what did I get in return? The memory of Eleanor sitting at my dining table, sipping tea from the china I bought, looking around with disdain. "You work too much," she would sigh, adjusting her pearl necklace. "A real wife makes a home comfortable. No wonder Mark is always so stressed. You don't create a peaceful environment for him." The injustice of it all used to burn in my chest like a swallowed ember. I was the one paying the mortgage. I was the one buying the groceries. Yet I was painted as the villain in their shared narrative. They needed a scapegoat for Mark's inadequacies, and I was the easiest target. The emotional neglect was a slow drip, eroding my self-worth until I barely recognized myself. But the embers of that injustice eventually sparked my survival instinct. The turning point didn't come with a screaming match or a dramatic revelation. It came on a mundane Tuesday evening, wrapped in the cold, clinical language of betrayal. Mark had sat me down, looking more annoyed than remorseful. He told me he needed space to grow, and that someone else had finally helped him realize his true potential. That someone was Chloe, the daughter of a local real estate developer. She understands my ambitions, Mark had said, avoiding my eyes. She doesn't constantly ground me with reality like you do. I remembered sitting perfectly still, the silence in the room buzzing in my ears. I didn't cry. I think I had already shed all my tears during the lonely years prior. When Eleanor found out, she didn't even attempt to hide her glee. On the day I packed my bags, she stood in the doorway, her arms crossed, watching me like a security guard monitoring a shoplifter. "Don't expect a dime from him," Eleanor had sneered, her voice dripping with satisfaction. "He's finally moving up in the world. Divorcing you is the best thing that could ever happen to his future." You were always holding him back. I hadn't fought for alimony. I hadn't fought for the car or the furniture. I just wanted out. I walked away with my clothes, my laptop, and a shattered heart, leaving them to their delusions of grandeur. I traded my dignity for peace, knowing that fighting them would only prolong my misery. As I parked my car in the bank's reserved VIP lot, I felt a familiar tightness in my chest. The betrayal still stung, not because I missed him, but because of how little my sacrifice had mattered to them. Walking through the heavy glass doors of the bank, the cool, air-conditioned breeze washed over me, carrying the scent of expensive leather and polished marble. The teller greeted me by name, a warm smile spreading across her face. "Good morning. Mr. Harrison is expecting you in the VIP lounge." I nodded, returning her smile. Rebuilding my life hadn't been a cinematic montage of quick successes. It had been brutal, exhausting work. The first few months after the divorce were spent in a tiny, drafty studio apartment. I slept on an air mattress, eating ramen noodles, pouring every waking hour into scaling my freelance design work into a full-fledged agency. I channeled my grief, my anger, and my feelings of profound inadequacy into my business. Without Mark's constant financial drains and Eleanor's daily emotional taxation, my income began to accumulate. I started securing bigger clients, hiring a small team, and eventually making smart investments. The same harsh reality Mark despised was the very thing that built my wealth. I learned to trust my instincts again. I learned to value my own worth. Today was the culmination of that grueling journey. I was here to sign the papers for a prime piece of commercial real estate. It was a moment of pure, unadulterated triumph. I walked toward the frosted glass doors of the VIP lounge, my heels clicking confidently against the tile floor. I felt untouchable. The frightened, exhausted woman who left her marriage a year ago was gone, replaced by someone who knew exactly what she brought to the table. I pushed the door open, expecting to find my account manager waiting with coffee and a stack of contracts. Instead, the universe decided it was time for a test. The VIP lounge was an oasis of luxury, featuring plush velvet armchairs, muted jazz playing from hidden speakers, and a fully stocked espresso bar. I walked over to the seating area, placing my briefcase on the glass coffee table. I hadn't even sat down when a voice, sharp, nasal, and dripping with unmistakable arrogance, pierced the quiet atmosphere. "Well, well, look what the cat dragged in." I didn't realize they let just anyone into this section of the bank. I froze. My blood turned to ice water. I didn't need to turn around to know who it was. The cadence of that condescending tone had haunted my nightmares for years. Slowly, I turned to face her. Eleanor stood there, looking like a caricature of wealth. She was draped in a designer silk scarf that clashed with her heavy gold jewelry, clutching a quilted handbag like a shield. Her eyes scanned me from head to toe, pausing momentarily on my tailored suit, before her lips curled into that familiar, smug smirk. "Hello, Eleanor," I said, keeping my voice perfectly level. I refused to let her see the sudden, chaotic hammering of my heart. "It's been a year," she noted, taking a step closer, invading my space just as she used to do in my kitchen. "You look surviving. I suppose you're here applying for a microloan, or perhaps pleading for a credit extension." "I'm here for a meeting," I replied simply, refusing to take the bait. Eleanor let out a short, mocking laugh. "Of course you are." "Well, don't let me keep you from your little struggles. I'm just here handling some major asset transfers for Mark. You know, divorcing you was the smartest financial move my son ever did." Eleanor didn't wait for an invitation to sit. She gracefully lowered herself into the armchair opposite mine, arranging her silk scarf with meticulous care, making sure the designer logo was perfectly visible. Her eyes gleamed with a predatory satisfaction, eager to recount every detail of my ex-husband's supposed triumphs. "Yes, things have changed quite drastically since you left," she continued, her voice practically vibrating with smugness. "Mark finally has a partner who matches his pedigree. Chloe's father has been instrumental in opening doors that were permanently closed when he was burdened by your lack of connections." I kept my expression entirely neutral, resting my hands neatly on my lap. The old me would have shrunk into the upholstery, fighting back tears of inadequacy while mentally listing all the sacrifices I had made to keep her son out of bankruptcy. But the woman sitting here today only felt a profound sense of pity. Eleanor was still playing a game I had long since abandoned. She measured human worth in country club memberships and zip codes, entirely blind to the rot beneath the floorboards. "I'm glad to hear Mark is doing well," I said softly, and to my own surprise, I genuinely meant it. Harboring resentment was an expensive emotion, and I refused to spend another ounce of my energy on them. But Eleanor wasn't looking for my peace. She was looking for my pain. She leaned forward, her heavy perfume momentarily overpowering the scent of the roasted coffee in the room. "Doing well is an understatement," she scoffed. "He's extraordinary. He's living the life he was always destined for, before he got sidetracked by a starter marriage." I simply watched her, taking in the subtle, nervous flutter of her eyelids and the tight grip she maintained on her quilted handbag. For all her boasting, there was a rigid, desperate energy about her. It was the same energy Mark used to have when he was trying to sell me on a business idea that was destined to fail. "It must be a relief for you," I replied evenly. "Not having to worry about his future anymore." Eleanor bristled slightly, clearly annoyed that I wasn't dissolving into a puddle of regret and jealousy. She wanted me to beg for details. She wanted me to weep over the life I had supposedly lost. When I offered nothing but calm detachment, she doubled down, deciding to use her heaviest ammunition. "Relief doesn't begin to cover it," she stated proudly, puffing out her chest. "Chloe understands real estate development in a way you never could. She didn't just support Mark emotionally. Her family brought real, tangible assets to the table. They don't pinch pennies like you used to. They invest, big time." I nodded slowly, letting the silence stretch between us. My mind drifted to the rigorous due diligence I had been conducting over the past 3 weeks regarding the distressed commercial assets I was about to purchase. The real estate market was ruthless right now, especially for over-leveraged dreamers who borrowed against their father-in-law's name without understanding the underlying math. The reality of high society wealth was often a house of cards, built on exorbitant loans and fragile egos. I didn't say any of this, of course. I just let Eleanor talk, allowing her to inflate the balloon of her own delusion. Eleanor, mistaking my quiet reflection for intimidated silence, leaned back in her chair with a triumphant, deeply smug smile. She looked around the VIP lounge as if she owned the building, then locked her gaze back onto me to deliver her final, crushing blow. "Honestly, running into you today is a wonderful reminder of how far we've come," she bragged, her voice echoing slightly in the quiet room. "Divorcing you was the smartest financial move my son ever did. Now he owns a massive villa with his new wife in the most exclusive part of the hills." For a split second, The sheer audacity of her statement hung in the air. A massive villa. The smartest financial move. I looked at the woman who had spent 5 years treating me like a maid, entirely convinced of her own constructed reality. I couldn't help it. A genuine, soft chuckle escaped my lips. It wasn't a laugh of bitterness, but of pure, profound irony. Eleanor's smug expression faltered, her perfectly drawn eyebrows knitting together in confusion and sudden irritation. "What is so funny?" she snapped, the polite veneer cracking to reveal the viciousness underneath. I tilted my head, looking her dead in the eyes, my voice barely above a whisper, but carrying the weight of absolute certainty. "Are you sure about that, Eleanor?" Before she could spit out a retort, the heavy, frosted glass doors of the lounge swung open. Harrison, the senior bank manager, stepped into the room holding a thick manila folder. He looked harried, but instantly brightened when he saw me. Eleanor immediately stood up, smoothing her skirt, her haughty demeanor snapping back into place. She assumed, naturally, that the senior manager was there for her. "Ah, finally," Eleanor said loudly, taking a step toward him. "I've been waiting for nearly 20 minutes to discuss the asset transfers for the Harrison Sterling accounts. I expect a bit more promptness in the VIP sector. Mr. Harrison blinked, stopping in his tracks. He glanced at Eleanor with a polite but distinctly confused expression. "I apologize, madam. The tellers outside handle routine personal accounting queries. I am actually here for a scheduled appointment." Eleanor's face flushed a deep, mottled red. "Routine? Do you know who my son is? Mr. Harrison offered a tight, professional smile before expertly sidestepping her. He walked directly toward where I was sitting, extending his hand warmly. "It is wonderful to see you again. I apologize for the slight delay. The legal team needed to triple-check the default clauses before we finalized the transfer." I stood up, shaking his hand firmly. "No apologies necessary, Mr. Harrison." "I appreciate the bank's thoroughness." Eleanor was frozen, her mouth slightly ajar, her eyes darting between me and the senior bank manager. The cognitive dissonance was practically short-circuiting her brain. She watched in stunned silence as Mr. Harrison placed the thick manila folder on the glass table directly in front of me, pulling a silver pen from his breast pocket. "Everything is in order," he said to me, completely ignoring the sputtering woman standing a few feet away. "We are ready to proceed with your acquisition of the defaulted property." "Defaulted property?" Eleanor parroted, her voice suddenly sounding very small and terribly shrill. Mr. Harrison paused, looking at me as if asking for permission to speak in front of this stranger. I gave him a subtle nod. "Yes," I said, turning my attention back to Eleanor. "I told you I was here for a meeting." "My agency has been highly profitable, and I am diversifying my portfolio by purchasing distressed real estate from the bank." Mr. Harrison opened the folder, spreading the crisp official documents across the table. "As requested, we have bundled the commercial lots with the residential foreclosure. The previous owner defaulted on the primary mortgage 3 months ago, and the secondary guarantor withdrew their financial backing last week." I looked down at the paperwork. Printed in bold, undeniable ink at the top of the page was the address of a sprawling property in the hills, Mark's massive villa. I slowly lifted my gaze to meet Eleanor's. The blood had entirely drained from her face, leaving her pale and trembling. The smugness was gone, replaced by a raw, unadulterated terror. Chloe's wealthy family hadn't supported Mark's genius. They had realized he was a financial black hole and cut him off, leaving him to drown in the debt of a mansion he could never truly afford. 5 minutes, I whispered softly, letting the reality wash over her. That's all it took for the truth to catch up. The bank manager handed me the foreclosure documents. I took the silver pen, feeling the solid weight of it in my hand, while Eleanor's jaw practically dropped to the floor, the illusion of her perfect life shattering into a million irreparable pieces. "This is a mistake! There has to be a mistake!" Eleanor's voice cracked, shattering the refined quiet of the VIP lounge. She lunged forward, her manicured hands hovering over the glass table, as if she wanted to physically snatch the documents away from me. Mr. Harrison smoothly intercepted her line of sight, interposing himself with practiced, polite authority.
Madam, I must ask you to lower your voice. These are private and finalized financial proceedings. If you have concerns regarding your son's defaulted mortgage, you will need to schedule an appointment with the collections department. Eleanor ignored him, her wide, panicked eyes locked onto me. The heavily powdered skin around her nose was flushed, and her chest heaved.
"You can't do this," she hissed, abandoning her haughty persona for sheer desperation. "That is Mark's home. You are doing this out of spite." I looked down at the thick stack of papers. Spite? No. Spite would have been fighting for half of his non-existent assets during the divorce. Spite would have been warning Chloe's family about his atrocious financial habits. This was simply business. I uncapped the silver pen, letting the smooth metal rest against my knuckles. "I didn't force Mark to stop paying his mortgage, Eleanor," I said gently, completely devoid of malice. "And I didn't force his new father-in-law to withdraw his financial backing. I am merely purchasing a distressed asset from the bank." I pressed the pen to the paper and signed my name. With every loop and curve of my signature, I felt a heavy, invisible chain dissolving. I wasn't signing away my past. I was buying my future. I handed the pen back to Mr. Harrison, gathered my briefcase, and walked past Eleanor, leaving her stranded in the ruins of her own delusions. The drive back to my apartment was bathed in the warm, golden hues of the late morning sun. I gripped the leather steering wheel of my car, expecting a tsunami of euphoric triumph to wash over me. After all, I had just witnessed the ultimate karmic retribution. I had quite literally bought the roof over the heads of the people who had emotionally discarded me. Yet the victory felt incredibly hollow. I pulled over by a quiet park, turning off the engine. The silence in the cabin was deafening. Tears pricked the corners of my eyes, but they weren't tears of joy. They were tears of mourning for the naive, exhausted woman I used to be. I remembered the nights I stayed up until 3 a.m., rubbing Mark's shoulders, telling him we would figure out his debts together. I remembered skipping my own mother's birthday dinner because Eleanor had demanded I host a networking party for Mark's investors. The sadness wasn't about losing Mark. It was about the profound realization of how completely I had erased myself to keep his fragile ego intact. I had spent half a decade pouring water into a cracked vase, wondering why the flowers kept dying. Seeing Eleanor's terror in the bank didn't heal my old wounds. It merely confirmed what I had slowly learned over the past year in therapy. Their cruelty was never about my inadequacy. It was always about their own insecurities. I wiped a stray tear from my cheek, took a deep breath, and put the car back into drive. The ghosts of my marriage had finally been laid to rest. Now, I just had to deal with the fallout. By 8 o'clock that evening, I was curled up on my velvet sofa, a mug of chamomile tea warming my hands. I had spent the afternoon reviewing blueprints for the commercial lots I had just acquired, pushing the morning's dramatic encounter to the back of my mind. But the past, it seemed, was not quite done with me. My phone, resting on the coffee table, began to vibrate. An unknown number flashed across the screen. I let it ring out, assuming it was a spam call. 2 minutes later, it rang again, then a third time. With a sigh, I picked it up, my thumb hovering over the decline button before a strange intuition made me answer. "Hello?" I said cautiously. "Please don't hang up." The voice was raspy, strained, and immediately recognizable. It was Mark. My heart gave a singular, erratic thump, not from lingering affection, but from the sudden, jarring intrusion of his voice into my peaceful sanctuary. "What do you want, Mark?" I asked, my tone perfectly flat. "My mother called me," he said, the words tumbling out of his mouth in a chaotic rush. He sounded breathless, frantic. "She told me what happened at the bank." Please, you have to talk to me. You can't take the house. Chloe left me, the accounts are frozen. I have nothing left." The sheer audacity of his request hung heavily in the air. For a year, I had been nothing but a discarded stepping stone in his narrative of success. Now, stripped of his wealthy new wife and his mother's financial illusions, he dared to reach out to the very woman he had broken. "I'm listening," I replied coldly. I agreed to meet him the following afternoon at a crowded, brightly lit coffee shop downtown. I chose a public, neutral location to prevent any emotional outbursts or manipulative guilt trips. When I walked in, I almost didn't recognize him. The Mark I remembered, and the Mark Eleanor constantly bragged about, always wore bespoke suits and carried himself with an unearned, towering arrogance. The man sitting in the corner booth was a shadow of that illusion. He wore a rumpled sweater, his hair was unkempt, and there were deep purple bags beneath his bloodshot eyes. He looked exactly like what he was, a man whose house of cards had finally collapsed. I slid into the booth across from him, placing my latte gently on the table. "You have 10 minutes, Mark." He looked at me, his eyes wide and pleading. It was the same look he used to give me when he needed me to cover his credit card minimums. "You look incredible," he started, attempting a weak, charming smile that immediately fell flat under my icy stare. "Skip the flattery," I instructed smoothly. "Why did you ask to see me?" Mark swallowed hard, his shoulders slumping. "The house. My mother told me you bought the foreclosure. I know I messed up, okay? I know I hurt you. But Chloe's dad pulled his investments when the market dipped, and Chloe, she didn't want to stick around for the hard times. She packed up 2 weeks ago." I felt a quiet, clinical detachment. "And what does this have to do with me purchasing bank-owned property?" I asked, refusing to give him an inch of emotional ground. Mark leaned forward, clasping his hands together on the table like a penitent child. "I need time," he begged, his voice cracking. "Just let me stay in the villa. Rent it to me. Give me 6 months to get a new venture off the ground, and I'll buy it back from you with interest. We used to be a team. You know how hard I work when my back is against the wall." I stared at him, letting the absurdity of his words echo in my mind. We used to be a team. "We were never a team, Mark," I said softly, my voice steady and resolute. "A team pulls the weight together. I was your safety net. I was the collateral damage for your ego." "That's not true," he protested weakly, looking around the cafe to make sure no one was listening. "I always loved you." I just got confused. Chloe's family offered a shortcut, and I was weak, but you're the one who really knows me. "I do know you," I agreed, taking a slow sip of my coffee. "I know that you want me to subsidize your failures again. You want me to play the role of the forgiving, accommodating woman who cleans up your messes while your mother critiques my sweeping." I stood up, sliding a $10 bill onto the table to cover my drink. The final tether to my past snapped, releasing me entirely. "The eviction notice will be served on Monday, Mark. You have 30 days to vacate the premises before my contractors begin the commercial remodel. I suggest you start packing." I turned and walked out the door, the bright afternoon sun welcoming me back to my own life. The 30 days following my meeting with Mark passed with a strange, quiet efficiency. I did not hear from him again, nor did I reach out. I handed all communication over to my attorney, ensuring the eviction process was executed strictly by the book. I refused to let our toxic personal history muddy the clear waters of my business dealings. Instead, I buried myself in the comforting rhythm of my design agency. My days were filled with vibrant color palettes, bustling client meetings, and the steady, reassuring heartbeat of a life I had built entirely on my own terms. Yet, as the 30th day dawned, a subtle knot tightened in my stomach. Today was the day I was scheduled to take physical possession of the villa. It wasn't fear that I felt, but a profound sense of gravity. I was about to walk into the physical manifestation of Mark and Eleanor's arrogance, the very house they had wielded like a weapon to make me feel small. I dressed in my favorite slate gray trench coat, slipping on a pair of comfortable flats. I didn't need to dress up to prove my worth anymore. The deed in my briefcase did that for me.
As I drove my car up the winding, meticulously manicured roads of the exclusive hillside neighborhood, the air grew cooler, heavily scented with pine and expensive landscaping. The houses here were colossal monuments to wealth, hiding securely behind wrought iron gates. When I finally pulled into the driveway of the villa, I turned off the engine and just sat there for a moment. The imposing, modern structure loomed before me. It was beautiful, undoubtedly, but it felt remarkably cold. Taking a deep breath, I stepped out of the car, ready to close this chapter forever. My attorney had already secured the keys from the local sheriff's department, leaving them in a lockbox by the grand double doors. I punched in the code, the mechanical click sounding incredibly loud in the morning stillness. Pushing the heavy doors open, I stepped into the grand foyer. The silence inside was absolute, but the house itself told a chaotic story. The reality of Mark and Chloe's luxurious life was scattered across the hardwood floors. It wasn't the pristine, magazine-worthy sanctuary Eleanor had boasted about at the bank. It was a chaotic mess of unpaid utility notices piled on the entryway table, scuff marks on the walls from a rushed move, and empty champagne bottles left on the marble kitchen island. The illusion of their grandeur had been entirely stripped away. I walked slowly through the massive living room, my footsteps echoing against the high, vaulted ceilings. I remembered how Mark used to complain about our modest apartment, claiming the walls were closing in on his creativity. He had traded my unwavering loyalty for this hollow cavern, a space that ultimately swallowed him whole. As I ran my fingers along the dusty mantelpiece, I felt a wave of profound relief wash over me. The anger that had simmered in my chest for the past year completely evaporated. Seeing the pathetic reality of their perfect life cured me of any lingering resentment. I didn't hate Mark. I didn't even hate Eleanor. I just felt a deep, abiding sadness for people who spent their entire lives chasing an image rather than building a foundation. I turned toward the grand staircase, ready to inspect the second floor, when a sudden, sharp noise broke the silence. The sound came from the formal dining room, a sharp clatter of porcelain against wood. My heart skipped a beat, but logic quickly took over. The property was supposed to be completely vacant. Cautiously, I walked toward the archway, my sensible flats making no sound on the thick luxury rug in the hallway. There, standing on a step stool in the center of the room, was Eleanor. She was struggling to unhook a massive, ornate crystal chandelier from the ceiling medallion. She looked nothing like the impeccably groomed woman who had sneered at me in the VIP bank lounge a month ago. Her hair was uncharacteristically messy, her makeup was smudged, and she was wearing a simple, faded tracksuit. She was frantically pulling at the brass chain, her breath coming in ragged, panicked gasps. "Eleanor," I said gently, not wanting to startle her into a fall. She jumped, gasping loudly, and nearly lost her footing. She spun around, clutching a crystal teardrop from the fixture to her chest like a lifeline. When she saw it was me, her face flushed with a dark, humiliating red. She didn't have her designer handbag. She didn't have her smug smile. She had been caught scavenging the remnants of her son's ruined life. "What are you doing here?" she snapped, though her voice wobbled terribly, betraying her fear. "You have no right to sneak up on people." "I own the property, Eleanor," I reminded her softly, keeping my distance. "The 30-day grace period ended at midnight. You are trespassing. But more importantly, taking fixtures from a foreclosed home is technically theft from the bank's original asset list. You could get into serious legal trouble." Eleanor's grip on the crystal tightened until her knuckles turned bone white.
For a second, I thought she was going to launch into one of her classic, venomous tirades about my background or my lack of class. I braced myself for the insult. Instead, her shoulders simply collapsed. The fight completely drained out of her, leaving behind a frail, terrified older woman.
"It belonged to my grandmother," she whispered, her voice cracking. "The chandelier. I gave it to Mark as a housewarming gift when he moved in here. It's the last piece of real family history we have left. The bank already took his cars, his accounts. Chloe's father sued him for breach of contract. I just wanted to save this one thing." A heavy, suffocating sadness filled the room.
This was the woman who had spent years telling me I wasn't good enough for her family, reduced to sneaking into a foreclosed home to salvage a piece of glass. She was drowning in the consequences of the very superficiality she had worshipped. I looked at the chandelier, then back at Eleanor's tear-streaked face. The old me, the wounded daughter-in-law, might have felt a surge of vindictive triumph. But the woman I had become only felt mercy. "Step down, Eleanor," I said quietly. She looked at me, her eyes brimming with unshed tears of humiliation, expecting me to call the police. Slowly, she stepped off the stool. "I will have my contractors uninstall it safely tomorrow," I told her, my voice remarkably steady. "I will have it boxed and delivered to your home by the end of the week."
"You don't need to steal your own history."
Eleanor stared at me, completely stunned. Her mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. The grace I offered her was a language she simply did not speak. She had expected cruelty, because cruelty was what she had always freely given to me. "Why?" she finally choked out, wiping a tear from her wrinkled cheek. "After everything I said to you, after everything we did, why are you letting me have it?" I looked around the massive, echoing dining room, then looked Eleanor directly in the eyes. "Because I don't need it, Eleanor, and because carrying around the weight of your mistakes is exhausting enough for you. I refuse to carry it for you anymore." I didn't wait for her to apologize. I didn't need one. An apology wouldn't rewrite the years of emotional neglect, and it wouldn't change the past. I simply gestured toward the front door. Defeated, she picked up her small canvas tote bag and walked past me, her head bowed in silent shame. I followed her to the grand entryway and watched as she walked down the driveway to her parked sedan. She didn't look back. When her car disappeared down the winding hill, I closed the heavy double doors, the solid thud echoing through the empty space. I stood in the foyer, the quiet enveloping me like a warm blanket. The ghosts of my marriage had officially vacated the premises. I took the deed out of my briefcase and set it on the dusty table. This house wouldn't be a monument to anyone's ego anymore. It was going to be the new headquarters for my design firm, a place built on hard work, resilience, and genuine worth. I finally had the keys to my own future, and the doors were wide open. The transformation of the villa began on a crisp Monday morning, marked by the arrival of a dozen contractors and the roar of heavy machinery. I stood in the driveway, holding a steaming cup of coffee, watching as the crew unloaded rolls of blueprints and protective canvas drop cloths. The goal wasn't just to renovate a foreclosed home. It was to physically dismantle the oppressive architecture of Mark and Eleanor's pretension and rebuild it into a space of creativity and light. Walking through the house with my lead contractor, David, we mapped out the demolition. The gaudy, faux gold accents that Chloe had insisted on were the first to go. We tore down the restrictive walls that separated the formal living areas, opening the floor plan to allow natural sunlight to flood the interior. Every swing of the sledgehammer felt incredibly cathartic, like I was breaking through the final, lingering barriers of my own self-doubt. As the days turned into weeks, the cold, echoing mansion slowly began to warm. The sterile marble floors were replaced with rich, natural oak. The dark, heavily draped windows were stripped bare, revealing breathtaking views of the valley below. My design team started bringing in drafting tables, fabric swatches, and color boards, breathing a vibrant, bustling life into the once dead space. It was grueling, messy work, coated in a fine layer of drywall dust, but I had never been happier. The physical labor mirrored my internal healing. I was clearing out the rot to make room for something sustainable. The villa was no longer a monument to a failed marriage or a symbol of high society anxiety. It was becoming a sanctuary of hard work, a testament to the fact that hitting rock bottom is sometimes the best foundation to build upon. During the third week of the remodel, David called me into what used to be the master suite's expansive walk-in closet. They were tearing out the custom shelving to create an open-concept resource library for my junior designers. Sitting on the bare floorboards amidst a pile of discarded drywall was a small, dusty cardboard box that the previous movers had somehow overlooked. "I thought you might want to look through this before we toss it in the dumpster," David said, wiping a streak of dust from his forehead. I thanked him and knelt beside the box, pulling open the taped flaps. Inside, buried beneath old tax documents and tangled phone chargers, was a small, leather-bound photo album. My breath caught slightly in my throat. I recognized it immediately. It was the album I had put together for our first anniversary, back when we lived in that drafty little apartment, long before Chloe, the massive debts, or Eleanor's relentless cruelty had completely poisoned our lives. I sat cross-legged on the dusty floor and slowly turned the pages. There was Mark, laughing in our tiny kitchen with flour on his nose. There we were on a cheap weekend road trip, looking exhausted but genuinely happy. Seeing those faces felt like looking at two strangers. For the longest time, I had forced myself to remember only the bad times, the neglect, the betrayals, as a shield to protect my fragile heart. But sitting there, I realized I didn't need the shield anymore. The marriage wasn't entirely a lie. It had just run its painful, destructive course. Acknowledging that we once had moments of real joy didn't weaken my resolve. It simply made me human. I gently closed the album, deciding to keep it. It was a part of my story, scars and all. A month later, the renovation was nearly complete. The heavy scent of fresh paint and cut wood lingered in the air, and my staff was scheduled to move in their equipment by the weekend. I was in the front garden, kneeling in the dirt, planting a row of lavender bushes near the entryway. It was a quiet, grounding task, a final personal touch to claim the space as my own. "The place looks incredible. You really breathed life into it." I froze. The voice was quiet, hesitant, and entirely unmistakable. I stood up, brushing the soil from the knees of my jeans, and turned around. Mark stood at the edge of the driveway. He didn't look frantic or desperate like he had at the coffee shop. He looked different, older perhaps, but remarkably grounded. He was wearing a simple, faded button-down shirt and well-worn jeans. The pretentious aura that used to follow him like a dark cloud had completely vanished. He kept a respectful distance, his hands shoved deep into his pockets, looking at the newly painted facade of the house with genuine awe. "Hello, Mark," I said evenly. I felt a brief flutter of anxiety, but it quickly dissipated, replaced by a calm, steady curiosity. "What brings you here? The eviction was finalized weeks ago." "I know," he nodded quickly, his eyes dropping to the pavement. "I'm not here to ask for anything, I promise. I actually just got off a shift and I wanted to see it one last time, to see what you did with it." "A shift?" I asked, slightly tilting my head. He offered a small, self-deprecating smile. "Yeah, I got a job. A regular 9-to-5 desk job at a logistics firm. No grand investments, no venture capital, just work." I wiped my hands on a rag, studying him carefully. This was the most grounded I had seen him in over 5 years. "I wanted to apologize," Mark continued, his voice steady but laced with a profound, heavy sorrow. "At the coffee shop, I was still trying to manipulate you. I was terrified of losing the image I had built. But losing this house, losing everything, it broke the spell. I stayed silent, allowing him the space to speak. My mother and I, we lived in a fantasy world, he admitted, looking up to meet my eyes. We used you to hold that fantasy together, and when you wouldn't play along anymore, I blamed you. I threw away the best thing I ever had because I was too weak to face my own failures.
You worked yourself to the bone for me, and I repaid you with absolute betrayal. He took a shaky breath, clearly fighting back emotions he had suppressed for years. I know an apology doesn't fix it. I know it doesn't give you back the years you sacrificed. But I needed you to know that I see it now. I see what you did for me, and I see the monster I became. You were right to leave.
And you were right to take this house. I listened to his words, feeling the incredible weight of them settle in the air between us. It was the exact apology I had dreamt of receiving in the darkest, loneliest days of our marriage. But standing here now, surrounded by the beautiful life I had built from the ashes, I realized I no longer desperately needed it. Still, the sincerity in his voice was a balm to old, lingering wounds.
"Thank you, Mark," I said softly, the gentle breeze rustling the newly planted lavender between us. "It takes a lot of courage to admit those things. I appreciate you saying them." He looked at me, a flicker of hope in his tired eyes. Do you think there's a chance we could ever be friends again? Someday?"
I looked at the man who had broken my heart, realizing that the jagged pieces had healed back together stronger than before. To invite him back into my life, even as a friend, would be to invite the shadows back into the light. True reconciliation sometimes means making peace with a person from a distance, wishing them well without allowing them access to your future.
"No, Mark," I replied, kindly but firmly. "We can't be friends. Too much has happened, and we are entirely different people now. But I do forgive you. I truly do. And I hope you find the peace you're looking for in your new life." Mark nodded slowly, swallowing hard. A tear slipped down his cheek, but he wiped it away quickly. He understood.
The boundary was drawn, not out of malice, but out of profound self-respect. "I understand," he whispered. He took one last, long look at the beautiful, transformed villa, and then at me. "Goodbye, and congratulations on your success. You earned every bit of it." "Goodbye, Mark," I said. I watched him turn and walk away down the long driveway. As his figure disappeared around the bend, I didn't feel a single ounce of regret. I turned back to my building, the afternoon sun catching the glass of the new front doors, and walked inside, ready to finally write the rest of my story alone. The grand opening of the new agency headquarters was nothing short of spectacular. Where there was once cold, echoey silence, there was now the vibrant hum of laughter, clinking glasses, and the soft melody of a live string quartet. The villa, stripped of its former pretension, glowed with warm ambient lighting and the lively energy of my incredible team. We had invited our top clients, local business leaders, and the contractors who had worked tirelessly to bring my vision to life. I stood near the grand staircase, the very spot where I had once caught Eleanor desperately clinging to her grandmother's chandelier, and looked out over the crowd. Waiters navigated the open concept floor plan, carrying trays of sparkling cider and hors d'oeuvres. The walls were adorned with our agency's proudest design portfolios, showcasing the hard work that had built this empire. David, my lead contractor, walked up beside me and handed me a glass of cider. "You did it," he smiled, gesturing to the crowded room. "It's hard to believe this is the same gloomy fortress we walked into a few months ago." "We did it," I corrected him, clinking my glass against his. As I mingled with my guests, receiving warm congratulations and discussing future projects, I felt an overwhelming sense of belonging. For years, I had desperately tried to fit into a family that viewed me as a mere utility. I had twisted myself into knots trying to earn a seat at a table where the game was rigged against me. Tonight, I realized I hadn't just bought a building. I had built my own table. The people in this room respected me for my mind, my resilience, and my character. I was finally home. A week after the grand opening, the chaotic excitement settled into a productive, steady rhythm. I was sitting at my new desk, which overlooked the sweeping valley below, sorting through a stack of mail. Amidst the vendor invoices and fabric swatches, a small, cream-colored envelope caught my eye. The handwriting on the front was elegant, sharp, and instantly recognizable. I carefully sliced the envelope open with a brass letter opener. Inside was a single piece of stationery. It was from Eleanor. The chandelier arrived safely, the letter began, lacking any formal greeting. I had it installed in the dining room of my new, downsized apartment. To be entirely honest, it looks ridiculous here. It is far too large, too ornate, and entirely out of place in this small space. It is a constant, glaring reminder of how tightly I clung to things that no longer fit the reality of my life. I paused, reading the words again. There was a vulnerability in the ink that Eleanor had never allowed herself to show in person. Mark told me about his visit to the property, the letter continued. He told me that you forgave him. I do not expect the same grace for myself, nor do I deserve it. I was cruel to you, not because you were lacking, but because your quiet strength highlighted all the ways we were incredibly weak. You built the life I always pretended to have. I am learning to live with that shame. Goodbye. I slowly folded the letter and placed it in my bottom drawer. It wasn't a perfect apology, but it was honest. It was the absolute final piece of closure I needed to permanently seal the door on my past. The success of the agency grew exponentially in our new location, but the most fulfilling part of my journey wasn't the increasing profit margins. It was the culture we cultivated. One rainy Tuesday afternoon, I found Maya, one of my brightest junior designers, sitting quietly in the resource library, wiping away tears. I gently pulled up a chair beside her, offering a warm smile and a box of tissues. "Do you want to talk about it?" I asked softly. Maya sniffled, looking down at her lap. "It's my boyfriend," she confessed, her voice trembling. "I got the promotion last week, and I was so excited to tell him. But instead of celebrating, he got angry. He said I'm prioritizing my career over our relationship. He makes me feel like my ambition is a flaw, like I'm doing something wrong by wanting to succeed." A profound wave of empathy washed over me. I recognized that exact pain, the subtle, insidious guilt-tripping designed to keep a woman small so a man could feel big. "Maya, listen to me," I said, my voice steady and resolute. "A partner who truly loves you will celebrate your growth, not be intimidated by it. You are not responsible for managing his insecurities at the expense of your own potential." She looked up at me, her eyes wide with a mix of surprise and relief. "I once shrank myself to fit into a life that was too small for me," I shared quietly, gesturing to the expansive walls around us. "It cost me years of my peace. Don't make the same mistake. Your ambition is a gift. Protect it fiercely." Watching Maya sit up a little straighter, I realized that my past struggles had simply been training for this exact kind of leadership. That evening, I drove away from the grand villa and headed back to my modest, minimalist apartment in the city. Many of my clients and peers had assumed that purchasing the massive estate meant I would move into it. They were often shocked to learn that I had strictly zoned it for commercial use and kept my personal residence exactly as it was. As I unlocked my front door and stepped into the quiet comfort of my home, I felt the familiar, soothing embrace of my own space. I kicked off my shoes, brewed a cup of chamomile tea, and curled up on my velvet sofa. Eleanor and Mark had always equated wealth with square footage, designer labels, and exclusive zip codes. They chased the illusion of prosperity so relentlessly that they completely bankrupted their souls in the process. For them, A house was a stage for a performance they could never truly afford. But as I looked around my cozy living room, listening to the gentle patter of rain against the window, I understood what true wealth actually was. It wasn't the commercial property I owned, or the zeros in my bank account. True wealth was the profound, unshakable peace of mind I felt in this exact moment. It was the ability to go to sleep without the heavy, suffocating anxiety of someone else's lies. It was the freedom to wake up and design my own destiny. I took a sip of my tea, feeling a deep, abiding gratitude for the quiet simplicity of my life. The morning sun crept over the horizon, painting the sky in brilliant strokes of gold and lavender. I stood on the balcony of my agency's executive suite, the cool morning breeze rustling my hair. Below me, the city was just beginning to wake up, a sprawling canvas of endless possibilities. It had been exactly 2 years since I walked out of a marriage that nearly broke me, and 1 year since that fateful encounter in the bank's VIP lounge. The journey from the exhausted, invisible daughter-in-law to the empowered woman standing here today had been paved with heartache, grueling hard work, and profound self-discovery. I rested my hands on the cool metal railing. I had learned that you cannot force people to respect your worth, but you can absolutely refuse to entertain those who don't. I had learned that forgiveness is not a gift you give to those who wronged you. It is a key you use to unlock your own emotional prison. And most importantly, I had learned that the most beautiful, enduring structures are often built on the ruins of the ones that failed us. I took one final deep breath of the crisp morning air, letting the warmth of the sun wash over my face. The past was fully demolished, the debris had been cleared, and the foundation of my spirit was finally solid rock. I turned away from the balcony and walked back into my office, ready to face whatever the day had in store. My story was no longer a domestic tragedy defined by someone else's shadows. It was a masterpiece, entirely of my own design.